How y'all doing tonight? Sorry you're not on spring break right now, right? My daughters, they're in the elementary school here, in the middle school here, and they get a spring break, but sorry, when you're a university student, it just gets cut. So you're supposed to be on spring break right now, but instead you're here enjoying college life. But I'm excited to be with you all tonight and continuing this theme that you all have been talking about on Tuesday nights previously, where you've been thinking about what's next. And what we've been talking about is thinking about the next steps for you in your faith. Wherever you're at on your spiritual journey, really trying to figure out, where do I go from here? What are some of those ingredients for me and you to move forward? And tonight we're talking about this topic of fellowship, like the guys introduced a little bit earlier. Now, fellowship, again, it has this idea of what role do other people play in our faith? And we're going to talk about that in a few, but I want to hear from you all. I want to hear what you just discussed. Because I'm curious, when you think about today, the greatest actors and actresses alive today, who is it that comes to mind? And so shout a few of those out. The greatest actor and actresses today. Robert Downey Jr. That's a good one. Anyone else in that camp? Robert Downey Jr. Who else? Okay, it's all kind of a blur. You got to shout it. What's that? Okay. Twilight dude, okay? Will Smith, another great one. Who else? What's that? The Rock. I think The Rock is actually the highest paid actor right now, okay? At least currently this year. What's that? Kevin Hart? Yep, and maybe one more. Last one. It's just all a blur. It's all a blur. I have no idea who you're saying, but I'm sure they're a great actor, a great actress, right? Well, hey, let me take you back 20 years to when I was in your seat. Okay, back when I was in college, there was no debate. Okay, 20 years ago, there was a clear-cut, most popular actor, and it was this guy, Tom Hanks. Okay, y'all know who Tom Hanks is. He's still making movies today. I think Greyhound just came out, this last year, another World War II movie. Hanks has been around for like 35 years. If you take all of his movies, he's been in over 70 movies, okay? And he's produced dozens beyond that. But particularly when I was in college, every year Hanks just produced one blockbuster after the next. And so he was clear-cut. Around 2000, he was just the best actor that there was. Here's a few of the movies that he starred in, and y'all have probably seen some of these, but a lot of these are classics, okay, back in the day. So Big, Apollo 13, Saving Private Ryan, You Got Mail, Green Mile, Sleepless in Seattle, Forrest Gump, Toy Story, he was the voice of Woody there. Band of Brothers, he directed that, helped write it. Sully, Captain Phillips, The Terminal, Polar Express, and on and on and on. There's so many more, even over the last 10 years. And what made him such a phenomenal actor is he could do it all, right? He could do war movies and he could do rom-coms, right? He could do serious dramas and he could have fun. And so there's this whole spectrum in his acting ability, kind of in his repertoire, which is why he was such a dominant actor. And even now, even like 40 years after his first movie, he's still going strong. And I think there's a couple more movies coming out even over the next couple of years that he's kind of the lead actor in. Now, all of these are great movies, but there's one in particular that I want to begin with tonight. And I'm curious if any of you all saw this. It's called Castaway. Some of y'all see this? I love the movie Castaway. It came out in 2000. And if you haven't seen it, this is the basic storyline, okay? Tom Hanks, he worked with FedEx. Okay, he was working with this shipping company, and at one point, he is on a plane that's bringing an enormous amount of packages from the U.S. to Malaysia. But somewhere over the South Pacific Islands, they run into a storm. And in the storm, the plane crashes. Everyone on the plane dies except for Tom Hanks. And the next day, he's actually washed ashore on this small deserted island along with a few packages from the plane wreckage that washed up on shore with him. And the entire movie basically has one theme. It's a theme of his survival. And for 4 years on this island, the movie tries to teach us about what did it take for him to survive until he was rescued 4 years later. And as you can imagine, there were some basics to his survival. He had to figure out, how do you get food? He had to figure out, where do you get fresh water? He had to figure out some basis of shelter. And all of those things were given a little bit of airtime in the movie. But the predominant thing that the movie focused on, looking at his survival story and looking at his needs, wasn't just his need for food. It wasn't his need for water. It wasn't his need for shelter. The main thing that the movie focused on was his need for camaraderie, his need for companionship, recognizing that he could have had food, water, shelter, but there was something else that was going to be essential for him to survive. And that was camaraderie. And if you've seen the movie, you realize that when he was on this isolated island, there was no one for him to talk to. There was no one for him to become friends with. But he actually took this volleyball that took on the name Wilson, because it was a Wilson Sporting Goods volleyball. You can see that in the picture. And he actually turned this volleyball into his companion, okay, into his friend. And over the course of those 4 years, most of the movie is looking at these interactions that he and this volleyball have, the conversations that they have, the interactions they have, the things that they discuss with each other. And when Tom Hanks talked about why he wanted to produce this movie, he said that for him was the main point. He said, yes, it's a survival story, but he said, we made this movie because we wanted people to realize that survival is more than merely about food and water and shelter. That just as crucial of an ingredient in our lives is this need for camaraderie. It is this need for companionship. And if we're going to survive and thrive in life, we need that in our lives, in addition to what we typically think of as the basic essentials of life. Now, tonight, I want us to think about that same theme. Not so much in the sense of surviving on a deserted island, but thinking about it as it relates to our faith. Thinking about this idea of what's next. How do we take the next steps? And I want us to realize that essential in our ability to take those next steps is likewise our need for camaraderie, our need for companionship in our spiritual journeys and in our growth in our faith. And so we want to think about it in terms of our faith. We want to think about it in terms of life. And we're going to look at one place in the Bible that explains this a little bit. And it's going to give us some clues for us as we think about what's next. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about culture. Okay, how many of y'all have taken a sociology class at some point in college? Okay, many of you have. You may have heard these terms in your sociology class, because in sociology, one of the ways that they kind of characterize different cultures or different societies is they use these terms. Societies can either be classified as an individualistic society or as a collectivistic society. And most cultures will tend to lean one direction or the other. And let me kind of give you the contrast. Let me tell you the difference between what an individualistic society is, or an individualistic culture, and that which is collectivistic. Here's a few contrasts. In an individualistic society, it fosters independence and individual achievement. But in a collectivistic society, it fosters interdependence and group success. In other words, in an individualistic society, it's all about you as a person succeeding. But in a collectivistic one, it's about the group succeeding. It's about we all succeed. Go on. In an individualistic society, it promotes self-expression, individual thinking, personal choice, and tends to have a disregard for authority, tends to have a disregard for those who are older. Where in a collectivistic society, it tends to promote adherence to norms, respect for authority as well as elders, and it values more group consensus. Okay, can we all come to a common answer together? Thirdly, an individualistic society is associated with private property or individual ownership, where a collectivistic society is associated with shared property or group ownership. An individualistic society tends to be more self-reliant. It tends to be more competitive. It tends to be more assertive, self-assured, and yet private. You know, acknowledging, hey, this is my private space. No one has a right to intervene or to get in here. Where a collectivistic society tends to be more connected, more cooperative, more obedient, more sensitive, and in a similar way, more transparent. A couple more. An individualistic society tends to communicate in a more direct fashion. Okay, it tends to be more explicit. It tends to be more personal in the communication, where a collectivistic society tends to be more intuitive. in the way people communicate. It's more complex. It's more impressionistic in a communication style. And then lastly, the last contrast I want to highlight here is that in an individualistic society, tasks tend to prevail over relationships. But in a collectivistic society, relationships tend to prevail over task. Now, let me ask some questions as you think about these two different kinds of societies. I'm going to ask you to do a show of hands, okay? And you can't not raise your hand, okay? I'm going to give you two options, and you have to raise your hand on one or the other, okay? You can't just kind of go neutral on this. First question is this: which of these would you say is the better society? Okay, which of these would you say is superior, is better than the other? How many of y'all would say an individualistic society is the better of these two? Okay, there's some hands there. You can put those down. How about collectivistic? Which of you would say this is the better culture or the better society? Okay, hey, there's probably the majority of people who are in that camp. I think you can honestly make a good argument for both, right? There's probably aspects of each type of culture or each type of society that have their advantages, if you will. Back in 2017, 2018, my family and I, we actually got to live in the Philippines. And all the time, my girls and myself, my wife, we were like, man, this is just kind of frustrating. You know, we were just living in a different culture. People thought different, acted different, lived different. And one of the themes that we just would say when we were living in a different culture was this, is we'd say, hey, it's not wrong, it's just different. You know, it's not wrong, it's just different. And I think when we look at these two cultures or these two societies, sometimes that's the case. It's not that one is necessarily right and one's necessarily wrong. Sometimes it's just differences, okay? There's not necessarily an ethical preference or one superior to the other. Sometimes there's just differences. And so I think you could make a case that both of these have their advantages. Second question is this: which culture do you think best represents us? When you think about us in this room, which of these would you say is more characteristic of us? Would you say that we tend to be an individualistic society? How many of y'all would put us in that camp? Okay. How about who would say we are more of a collectivistic society? Raise your hands. Okay, a few of y'all there. Now, there's no a hard and fast rule on this, but generally speaking, okay, Western societies tend to be more individualistic. And so that would mean basically North America, Europe, and Australia would tend to lean, again, there's exceptions to that, but those three continents would tend to lean a little bit more in the individualistic sense. Where by contrast, South America, Africa, and Asia would tend to lean, again, there's exceptions, but would tend to lean more in the collectivistic, type direction. And so again, you look throughout the world and you basically see both. You see predominant cultures that lean one direction or tend to lean the other. Now, here's the third question I want us to think about tonight, and that's this. When it comes to our faith, if we were to go to the Bible and see what the Bible describes as the life of faith that God is inviting us into, would you think that it would lean more towards an individualistic culture, or do you think it would lean more towards a collectivistic culture? How many of y'all would say it would lean towards an individualistic culture? Raise your hand. Okay, a few hands there. How about collectivistic? How many of y'all would think that? Okay, cool. Well, it seems that there's we would say, hey, it probably leans toward collectivistic. Once again, I think that there's a good argument for both. Okay, I think there's certain aspects, if we go to the Bible, that would clearly be individualistic. In other words, when you think about your faith, you know what? Your mom can't have faith for you. Your friends can't have faith for you. They can't have a relationship with God in your place. There's some aspects of our faith that are individualistic, okay? It has to be your faith. It has to be my faith. Someone else can't have that for us. In a similar way, growing in your faith. Someone else can't grow in your faith for you. It can't just be, well, we'll just grow, as some clump together, okay? It has to be decisions and choices, that you and I make in order to grow in our faith. There's aspects of it that are individualistic, and we can't deny that as we read the Bible. But in the same way, if we look at the collectivistic realities and we open up our Bible, we find that so often there is a communal, there is a collectivistic, there is a need for camaraderie if we really are going to take the next steps in our faith. And that's really what I want to focus in on tonight, because we all admitted, hey, we probably lean more towards an individualistic culture. And yet, as we thought about faith, most of us said, hey, there's a lot of collectivistic truths that the Bible describes. And I think we're right about that. And so if there's something that we need to learn as a culture, it probably is, well, we need to lean into, learn to appreciate, and learn to value in a greater way some of the realities, some of the needs that we have for others in our faith. Tonight, we're going to do that by just predominantly looking at one passage. Okay, it's one passage in the book of Hebrews. Now, Hebrews is in the New Testament of the Bible, and one of the main themes of the book of Hebrews is simply this: how do we persevere in our faith? How do we ensure that our faith continues to grow over the long haul, okay, over the course of our lives? And there's lots of things that it highlights in light of helping us to think through how to have a persevering faith. But one of the threads that's through this entire letter and is really highlighted in the 3 sentences that we're going to read tonight is this theme, or is this thread of the importance of others in our life. And so I want us to look at this, and I'm just going to kind of draw out 4 truths from this that we need to take to heart and that we need to apply to our lives. Here's the passage, Hebrews 3:12 through 14. It says this, it says, "See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful and an unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. But encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We've come to share in Christ if indeed we hold our original conviction firmly until the very end." Again, a lot in here. We're just going to draw out a few of the key themes, but tonight I want us to look at 4 truths. Okay, 4 truths from this passage that shows us how important it is that we have others in our life as we think about taking the next steps in our faith. Here's the first one for you to consider tonight, and it's this: it's dangerous to go it alone. It's dangerous to go it alone. Now, the guys earlier told you a little bit about my family. They mentioned that I've got a couple of daughters. Here's my 2 daughters, ages 12 and 10, 7th grade and 5th grade. Now, we like to think of ourselves that we're parents, Jennifer and I, we're parents that we like to give our daughters some freedom. Okay, we don't want to be helicopter parents. We don't want to be lawnmower parents. We want to give our daughters a lot of freedom. Matter of fact, there's a lot of things that we do that other parents are like, I can't believe you're letting your kids do that. And we're like, well, they'll be okay. You know, we're kind of a little bit more laissez-faire in some ways with the ways that we raise our kids. We want them to have freedom. We want them to learn some lessons even the hard way. And so we give them a lot of freedom. Now, that being said, there's also times, day after day, week after week, month after month, where we recognize, hey, this situation could be a little dangerous. And when our girls enter into those situations, we always tell them this: hey, you can do that, but you have to go together. Okay, you can do that, but you can't do it alone. Okay, you've got to have someone with you, or the 2 of you all need to go and do that together, because we realize that even though we want to give them freedom, okay, and we want to give them a sense of autonomy, we also realize, hey, that sometimes it's dangerous to do things alone. That sometimes there's situations that it's not wise for them to be going about it alone because of certain dangers that might exist in that situation. And so we say, hey, take your sister with you. You can go there, you can do that, but take your sister with you, okay? We realize that's a truth of raising kids, but it's a truth for all of us. I think about, this was a few years back, maybe a handful of years ago, where a group of us were actually at Table Rock. Who loves going to Table Rock? Who loves going to the lake, doing fun things on the lake? Well, a group of us were at Table Rock, and we're sitting on the dock, okay? And it's at one of these like inlets there at Table Rock, and me and 4 guys, Jordan Edwards was one of them there. And keep in mind, these other guys, they're all like 24 years old at the time, and I'm like 40 at the time. And we're sitting there at the edge of the dock, and the guys are like, hey, you think we could swim across, this whole inlet? And we looked at each other, and what usually happens when a bunch of guys get together, your pride swells up, and you're like, oh yeah, we can totally do that. And so we decided, hey, let's swim across. Now, this wasn't the main channel of the lake, but it was a pretty big inlet. It was about a 1/4 of a mile, across. And someone's like, should we get life jackets? And we're like, no, we're not taking life jackets. We're just going to swim this thing, right? I think one guy actually wised up and he had a life jacket. The rest of us, we all 4 dove in and we started swimming across, this 1/4 mile part of the lake. Now, the first half, it was going great, especially the young guys. And they were in a lot better shape than I was at, in the time. And I get about halfway across this area in the lake and I'm starting to get a little bit tired. I'm like, wow, this is longer than I thought it was going to be. And I wasn't like a competitive swimmer growing up, but I swam enough, that I didn't think this was going to be too big of a deal. But I get halfway across the lake and the adrenaline begins to kick in, okay, which was a good thing. And so it kind of gave me that second wind, keep going, keep going, keep going. But now I get 3/4 of the way across the lake. And all of a sudden the adrenaline is gone, okay? And I remember looking up 3/4 of the way across the lake there at Table Rock and seeing that I had about a football field length to go. And I'm like, man, there's nothing left in the tank. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I just put my head down and just kept swimming. But after about another, 10 yards, 20 yards, I look up again. Two of the other guys have already made it to the shore. And I just realized something. I'm like, hey, I am hitting the wall right now. And it wasn't so much that I was hitting the wall, from a physiological level. It was the fact that there was nothing in my lungs. There was no air. Okay. And I'm realizing I'm done. And I still have, almost 300 feet to go. The other guys are already there at the shore, and I've got nothing left in this moment. I realized really for the first time that I was kind of in a dangerous situation. And there was two reasons that I was in this dangerous situation. The first one was just that my lungs, I couldn't breathe. I was just so exhausted. I'd never been that way before. I've never been that way since, but I was just toast at this point. And that was the first problem. But the second problem that I faced in that moment was my pride. Because I realized that I thought I could do this on my own. I thought I was in a better position than I really was. And I came to the end, not only of my lung capacity, but I came to the end of my pride. And I realized, hey, if I don't get some help, I don't know that I'm going to make it this last 100 yards, this last 300 feet to get across the lake. Now, fortunately, the one guy that was kind of the straggler with me happened to be the guy that had the life jacket. Okay, and he was like 20 yards away, and he was just, he was just chilling. He was just kind of taking it easy, strolling across the lake. And I remember with what little breath I had left, looking over at him and saying, "Hey, man, can you come over here and help me out? Can I borrow that life jacket, for a little bit?" And fortunately, he was close enough. He came over, and then we kind of doggy paddle and kind of shared the life jacket all the way across the lake, and then had some guys come in a boat and pick us up. But in that moment, I realized something. Okay, one, I realized I need to swallow my pride, but two, I also realized, hey, it was dangerous to do that alone. Okay, and even though there's four of us that started out doing it, it was dangerous for me. It was probably a little unwise, a little foolish for me to feel like that I could have done this on my own. And I'm grateful that there was someone there beside me. Okay, now the Bible in this passage that we're looking at says something really similar, not so much in the way of swimming, but in the way of our faith. That it's dangerous to go about our faith alone. If you go back to the passage, notice what it describes here. Okay, notice what it describes in our spiritual journey. It said that we want to see to it that none of us has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. You see the danger there. It goes on in verse 13, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. You see, the Bible describes our faith here in our spiritual journey as one that has danger. And in this passage, we see really three specific dangers that we all have to face in our faith. There can be a danger of having a sinful and an unbelieving heart. There can be a danger of turning away from God. There can be a danger of being deceived and hardened by sin. And I've seen this in my own life, and I've seen it in countless other lives, that you can be doing really good in your faith, but all of a sudden some area of sin comes in to your life, some area where you're like, man, I know God would want me to do this, but you know what? I feel like I want to do it my own way. I want to make my own choices. I want to live make my own decisions, and I don't want to do what God kind of wants me to do. And slowly what begins to happen is that area of sin in our life, that area of pride in our life, it begins to deceive us. Okay, it begins to make us think, I know better than God, and I know better than some of those other people around me. I'm going to do this on my own. And what happens is that sin begins to not just deceive us, it begins to harden our hearts toward God, harden our hearts towards others. And what slowly begins to happen is our faith begins to erode. And what used to be a vibrant and strong faith can actually result in someone turning away from God. These are realistic dangers for you and I in our faith. And the Bible doesn't hide that fact, okay? It doesn't sugarcoat it. It says, listen, there are dangers. And in particular, there's dangers if we try to live out our faith alone. That's the first point we need to see from this passage. Second thing I want us to see from this passage is this, is that we should take responsibility for each other. We should take responsibility for each other. Now, again, as Americans, we tend to just think, man, I'm just going to look out for number one. Only person I need to take responsibility for is myself. I don't need to worry about you. I don't need to worry about them. All I need to worry about is myself. That tends to be our individualistic mindset and culture that we operate out of. Okay? I think of this even with my girls or with my family. Sometimes it's easy to be like, well, I don't have to pick that up. That's her clothes. You know, that's her mess. She did that. It's not my responsibility. It's someone else's. And we all do that. We look around and say, that's your responsibility. That's not mine. But yet when it comes to our faith, there is a sense in which we need to take responsibility for each other. You know, I think back to growing up. My three favorite sports growing up were tennis, baseball, and soccer. Okay, and I loved playing these sports, but they're very different, right? Tennis is an individual sport. And when I was playing tennis and I would go to these tournaments kind of all around the country and competing in these different events and all, I had friends that were doing that, but you know what? It didn't matter what they were doing, you know, on the courts down the way. I wasn't responsible for them. All I had to worry about was me. All I had to worry about was my match and getting to the next one, okay? Because it was an individual sport, they weren't my responsibility. But you know what? It was different when I played soccer. It was different when I played baseball. It's different for those of y'all who played volleyball or you played football or you played basketball, you know, or you played softball. You realize in a team sport, we need each other. And you're not only dependent upon other people, you know, but you also take responsibility for other people because you realize the success of any one person as an individual is dependent upon the others. And so if someone's not doing well, you care about that. You take responsibility in that area of their life. And the Bible says when it comes to our faith, that's the kind of mindset that we need to have. We need to have one that takes responsibility for each other. Let's go back to our passage. Notice it says this right out of the gate. It says, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has that particular kind of heart. You see the sense of responsibility there? You see it's telling us, hey, because of this danger, we have an obligation to each other. There's a responsibility that we have to protect one another, and we also have to recognize that we need each other. Okay, none of us can do this on our own. None of us can grow in our faith. None of us can live for God. None of us can be about the mission of God on our own. We have a responsibility to each other. You need me and I need you. Okay, that's just a fact of this. Okay, there's danger out there. It's dangerous to go it alone, but by contrast, we have a responsibility to each other. Third thing I want us to see tonight is this, and this is kind of the flip side. One is protective. This is more proactive, okay? Third truth for us to remember is that regular encouragement is crucial to our faith. Regular encouragement is crucial to our faith. And so we're responsible for each other, but what are we supposed to do? What's the solution? How do we help protect one another from the dangers that we face in our faith? Well, this passage says the key is that we need regular encouragement from each other. Notice what verse 13 says. Here's the solution. Here's the remedy to these dangers. It says, encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today. Okay, in other words, there's this regular role that we have in each other's life. And if we don't take this time, if we don't have this encouragement in our life, and we'll look at what that means here in just a minute, but if we don't have this in our life, guess what happens? We just follow the flow. We just do what everyone else does. Okay? We tend to all, no matter how individualistic we think we are, we all tend to have the herd mentality, right? And it's what, hey, what everyone else on my floor does, that's what I'm going to do. What everyone else in my house does, that's what I'm going to do. What everyone else in my family does, that's what I'm going to do. What everyone else on my team does, that's what I'm going to do. We tend to just go with the flow and follow the flow unless we have the encouragement that this passage is talking about. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. You know, I mentioned earlier that my family, we lived in the country of the Philippines a few years back. Okay, and there it's a beautiful country. It's a series of islands and all. It's kind of a second world country, so it's just a lot different than what we're used to in America, but it's beautiful in its own right. But at one point, we had gone to this city. The city was called Moaboil, and it was on a different part of the island that we lived at. And we were actually looking for a conference center, that we were going to have like this retreat, this conference in this city. And so we had gone there. We were kind of scouting out all these different convention centers and kind of retreat places. And while we were there, all the locals said, hey, you have to go diving just off the coast. Okay, off the coast here is something you will not see anywhere else in the world. You have to go diving or you have to go snorkeling there. And so even though our schedule was really packed for the few days that we were there, we decided, hey, let's do this. Okay, let's take a little bit of time. Let's go diving. Let's go see if this lives up to the hype of what everyone was describing. And so where we went was off the coast, actually in this picture in the upper right-hand corner, we went to this island, okay, which was just off the coast of the island that we were on. And so you had to take a boat over there. You can see the little boats that are kind of anchored up. We went to this island and we began to take some time and snorkel. Okay, here's a picture of me and my oldest daughter in those waters. Now, when we were there, and there was people that were scuba diving and the whole nine while we were there, we saw some things that were amazing. Okay, we saw the most amazing coral reefs that I've ever seen. I mean, completely untouched, okay? Just in the most pristine form. Unlike anything that you can see, even in like the Bahamas and places around here, these coral reefs were amazing. Second, you saw just these amazing fish. I mean, it's like little Nemos running around, everywhere. Just the most colorful fish. And I'm colorblind, but I could see these fish and just how colorful they were. I mean, it was really, really impressive and really, really cool. But none of those compared to the thing that people had said you've got to see. Okay, they said there is a wonder of the world that is under in this area of water, and it will blow your mind. And I remember thinking, no, that's not going to impress me, until I finally looked down and saw this underneath the water. It is a sardine run. And it's the only place in the world that this sardine run is continually there 12 months out of the year. There is a school of over 10 million sardines right off the coast of this island that we were in. And these are actual pictures of the city, of the sardine run. Here's a couple of more that are there. And we got underneath the water and we were diving down. In this pool of fish, okay, this school of fish, it's bigger than this room. Okay, you can't imagine, no picture, no like Planet Earth episode or something like that. None of it does it justice when you see this in person. 10 plus million fish, and guess what they're all doing? They're all swimming in absolute conformity, absolute uniformity. And when you swim into them and you try to interfere, it's like on a pivot, all 10 plus million of them just shift. And the shape of this school shifts and the direction of it shifts, and they all go in a completely different direction, but they all do it together. Again and again, no matter how many times you dive in and try to penetrate, they all follow each other. And the Bible is teaching us that in a similar way, we don't realize it, but we are a lot like this. No matter how much we think we can march to the beat of our own drum, what we tend to do is we tend to go with the flow. We tend to take on the values, the behaviors, the attitudes of people around us. And what our passage is saying tonight is saying, realize that there's a danger there. Going with the flow doesn't end well. Okay? Just following the crowd doesn't take you to where you want to go in life. It doesn't accomplish the goals and the dreams that you have in life. Going with the flow can be dangerous. But there's a remedy that this passage offers. And the remedy, it says, is this. We need to encourage one another daily, so that we don't go with the flow, so that this pattern of sin deceiving us, hardening us, turning our back to God doesn't become our trajectory and ultimately our destiny. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to encourage one another? Now, it doesn't just mean get each other out of noise or pep talks or little therapy sessions or something like that. This idea of encouragement is so much more than that. Okay, it's not just telling people you like them. Okay, when we hear the word encouragement, it tends to be what we think. But this word encouragement that we're called to do daily, it's this Greek word parakaleo. Okay, it's kind of Greek word. It's kind of put together. Para just means alongside. Okay, like a paramedic on side, a doctor. Kaleo, summer program is about its name Kaleo, because it's usually it's the word Kaleo. The idea of the summer program is that's it's an opportunity to invest in faith, to learn about this life that God has called us to, and the amazing purpose that God has given us. And you take the word Kaleo and the term together is you get this word encouragement. But what it means is this idea that we need people who come alongside us and will say, let's do this together. Okay, to encourage someone means I'm going to come alongside you. I'm going to call to your side, and I'm going to help you. We're going to strengthen one another so that we can do this together. We can live the way that God wants us to live. We can embrace the purpose and the mission of God, and we can do it together. It's this side-by-side reality. It's like you don't have to live your faith out alone. You don't have to take these next steps alone. You need parakaleo. You need people to come alongside of you and to say, hey, let's do this together. Okay? And this passage says we need this every single day. We need it every day. Now, when I was back in college, these were some men that were around me that really lived this out. They came alongside of me and we said, hey, let's do this together. Okay, now, what that didn't mean is, hey, well, let's just all go get a house and let's just move in together and let's just, try to live in some little community or convent or something like that together. No, we all lived in completely different pockets of campus, but we said, hey, let's be committed to helping one another, to strengthening one another, to encouraging one another in the truest sense of the word, to grow in our faith, to live this out. And so we lived in all different pockets. So Tim was in the res halls. Brad was a Sigma Chi. I was in a fraternity. Mason was a javelin thrower on the track team. Ryan was a Pike. David was in the dorms. Matt was a Lambda Chi. Gabe was on the cross-country team. And Jimmy was a wide receiver on the football team. We were all in different walks of life, but we were in small groups together. We would come together. We would provide accountability to one another. We said, hey, let's be there for one another so that we can ensure that each other really is moving forward, really is taking those next steps in their faith. And let's be committed to helping one another do what it takes. Okay? We realized it was dangerous to go it alone. We realized that we had a responsibility to each other, and we realized how necessary it was that we encourage one another day after day after day if we were going to not just survive spiritually, but if we were going to thrive and really take those next steps in our faith. And that brings me to the fourth point that I want us to see from our passage tonight. And it's simply this. When it comes to our faith, when it comes to taking these next steps, we want to have a mindset that says, hey, we're in this for the long haul. We're in this for the long haul. There's a lot of people that for a season will begin to kind of grow in their faith. They'll start well, but they won't finish well. And I've seen this happen over and over again. People who start well in their faith, but who don't finish well. It reminds me of the NCAA track championships there at the University of Oregon back in 2015. I remember watching this and being blown away by it. I can't remember if it was in the 800 or the 1600, but this guy from Oregon just dominated. Okay, he was like the number one, just the best runner in the world at this time. And most of the race, he was just crushing it. He was so far ahead of everyone else. He was just blowing everyone out of the water. But as this picture shows, he got about 20 yards from the finish line. And he was so far ahead of everyone. He was like going to PR at this moment. And he just started looking up at the crowd. And he could tell the crowd, it's a home crowd, because it's there in Eugene, Oregon. They were all cheering for him. And he started looking up at the crowd. And he started bringing the applause onto himself. He started cheering himself on as the crowd was just cheering himself on. But when he did that, what he didn't realize is he began to kind of let up a little bit. And even though he had a huge lead, and it's only 20 yards to go, see, the guys behind him, one from the University of Washington and one from the University of Kentucky, they hadn't let up. So here's this next picture. You can see him, just playing to the crowd, loving the applause that he was getting, just basking in his pride and in his glory in this moment. But something was happening that he didn't realize, and that is the other guys were catching up. And then you look at the picture right when it crossed the finish line, and he learned a lesson the hard way. And even though he had been, 15 feet ahead of this guy, just like 25 yards out, The guy from the University of Washington caught up with him, passed him by a head right at the finish line, and then the dude just falls to the ground, starts bawling. Because he realized what had happened. He realized in his arrogance and in his pride, he had celebrated way too soon. He had started well, but he didn't finish well. Okay, and I think in a lot of ways, this can be true of us in our lives. We can start out spiritually really well, and then we can begin to give ourselves pats on the back. We can begin to become self-congratulatory and thinking how well we're doing, and yet we cannot realize that all of a sudden we're slowing down, and all of a sudden we're failing to pass the finish line in the way that we want. And yet when the Bible talks about our faith, it doesn't just talk about a sprint. Okay, it doesn't just talk about doing the first lap well, the first few years, like your college years well. It's talking about living this way and thriving for a lifetime. Notice the way that the passage ends. It says, we've come to share in Christ if indeed we hold on to our original conviction firmly to the very end. You see, God wants you to have a faith that finishes, a faith that thrives to the end, a faith that doesn't just say, what's the next step now, but continues to live one step after another, day after day, year after year, until the end of your life. And remember, the ingredient here, the key here to not just starting well, but to finishing well, is how indispensable others will be in our lives so that we don't settle, so that we don't let up, so that sin doesn't come in and deceive us and harden us, and even make our hearts begin to turn from the very God who loves us, who has an amazing purpose for us, and who ultimately sent his son to save us. Okay? These four truths. It's dangerous to go it alone. We should take responsibility for each other. Regular encouragement is crucial in our faith, and we want to be in this for the long haul. We want to be in this for the long haul. Now, let me give you kind of three practical things, three kind of action steps, if you will, as you think about, well, what do I do with this truth? If this is true, and I promise you it is, where do I go? What do I do from here? Well, let me give you three things. Now, can't exhaust it, but I think three things that would be beneficial. Number one is this. I want to encourage you to choose your closest friends wisely. Choose your closest friends wisely. 2 Timothy 2:22 says this. It says, flee the evil desires of youth. That means having a good defense. Spiritually, you need a good defense, okay? There's things that will shipwreck your life, and we got to be cautious of them, okay? Don't step into some traps. You need to flee things that'll destroy your faith. That you need to have a good defense. But second, it says pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace. In other words, you also need to have a good offense. You need to have a good defense in your faith. You need to have a good offense in your faith. But notice where it ends. It says this, have that defense, have that offense, but do this with a good team. Do this with a good team. Flee these desires, pursue righteousness, and do this along with those who call unto the Lord out of a pure heart. You need friends in your life that have a sincere faith towards God. You need friends in your life who really want to live in a way that honors God. Your closest friends need to be those kind of men and those kind of women. Your spouse someday needs to be that kind of man or that kind of woman. Okay? These are the people that you want influencing you and shaping you in your life. Okay? When I think about our friends, they tend to fall into one of two categories. Who's an engineering major in here? Okay, so quite a few of y'all are. You could probably explain this better than me. I was a chemistry major, so I had to dabble a little bit in this. But there's a world of difference between synergy and entropy. Am I right, engineers? Okay, they can give a little tutorial afterwards for all us non-engineers in the room. But here's the basic gist of it. Okay, synergy is when multiple individuals or components come together and they better one another. Okay, they fuel one another. They promote one another as a result, okay? But entropy is the opposite. Entropy is the tendency of something to deteriorate or to decay or to crumble or to fall apart, okay? Now, when it comes to our faith, most of our friends will fall into one of these two categories. They'll either be a source of synergy spiritually in your life, or they'll be a source of entropy in your life. They'll do one or the other. So here's some synonyms. Synergy means someone who provides teamwork, alliance, union that will help or advance, work together, that'll improve your faith. There's a symbiotic relationship there. There's coaction. It increases, okay? It fuels you and makes you a better man or a better woman. It helps you to live out what's next. But friends in our life who are characterized by entropy are those who tend to cause your faith to collapse, to break up, to decay, to decline, to degenerate, to be destroyed, to worsen, or to fall apart. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about all your friends, but I'm saying who are the closest friends? Who are those that are having the biggest influence on your life? Whoever it is that's shaping you the most, you want that to be men and women of synergy, not men and women of entropy. If I go back to my college days, again, these are some of the guys that I mentioned earlier. You see, the thing that I appreciate about them is they were a source of synergy for me. They were then in my faith, and they still are to this day. I think I got 6 texts from these guys today alone. We stay in touch. This was a time when a bunch of us got together just the last year, right before the pandemic broke out. We live all across the country. We got back together. Why? Because we wanted to provide synergy with each other. Now, on the opposite side, these are some of my really good friends. These are a bunch of my fraternity brothers that I did life with and I pledged with, and we have some of the best memories with. But I also realized, hey, these are guys that I want to help shape, but I want to be careful about them shaping me. Because as I look at these guys' life, and we can fast forward now 20 years, right, in both categories, with the guys on the left, you know what I see? I see a lot of increasing. I see a lot of thriving in their careers, in their marriages, in their parenting, in their faith. And when I look at the guys on the right, as we stay in touch, do you know what I continue to see? Some of the same things that were true in college, in their lives, in their marriages, in the way they raise their kids, in their careers. You see, one is characterized by a continual entropy, and one is characterized by a continual synergy. And I'm so glad that the guys on the left had a more influential role in my life, that they shaped me for the better. Okay. And I like to think, and I hope that I helped shape them for the better. And I hope that even with all the guys on the right, I was bringing something better to them as well, and want to continue to do that even to this day. But my first encouragement to you is this, is who are your closest friends? Who are influencing you? Are they helping you to take those next step in your faith? Or are they just kind of casually just in neutral? Or worse, are they providing entropy for you and deteriorating your faith? Second thing, by way of practicality and action step, is just how important it is for you to have a mentor, in your life. We need mentors in our life. And Paul in 1 Thessalonians talked about this. He said, hey, all of us need someone that's almost like a father figure in our life to help us learn to live a life that honors God. Now, this person, this man or woman may not be older than you. They may actually be younger than you, but there's a sense in which they can provide some spiritual leadership or some input or some mentoring in your life. This is absolutely essential, and it has been in my life from early on in my faith and even to this very day. It's indispensable for us that we need mentors in our life. Here's one of those guys. This is David. David, for me, was a mentor and a good friend of mine from my earliest days in college. He helped me learn to walk with God. He helped me begin to develop character. He helped me begin to understand, how to be the man that God called me to be, and set the stage for me to be a husband, for me to live and work and to give my life to a purpose, to be a dad. And here's David and I still, this was this last year, and he continues to be a source of strength and encouragement and mentoring, to me in my life. We all need people like this, okay? We need peers alongside us who provide that synergy, but we also need mentors. We need someone who's just a little further down the road, even if they're younger than you and me. We need people like that in our lives because we can't do this on our own. And that brings me to my last point, and it's this as far as an action step, and it's simply this. Life is too important, and your faith is too important to be fragile. It's too important to be fragile. And what I mean by it is this, is if you have these kind of people in your life, these kind of friends, these kind of mentors, there's going to be times when they're going to challenge you. There's going to be times where they address areas of your life where they give you correction, where they give you rebuke, where they say, hey, there's something about your life that's not good. There's something about your values that need to change. There's something about your actions that are going to lead you to a place you don't want to go. And my question for you is this, are we strong enough, are we resilient enough to receive that, or do we get defensive? Okay, and do we get bitter and do we get frustrated when someone would actually challenge us in our life? You see, your life and your faith is too important for you and I to be fragile, for you and I to be soft, okay, and to not be able to receive that well. Now, it's unfortunate that today the term snowflake has got all these political derogatory connotations. Okay? That's kind of the way it's used right now. But if you could go back a handful of years ago, before the word got politicized, it was actually a sociological term. Matter of fact, in 2016, the Collins English Dictionary said snowflake was the word of the year. Okay? And it viewed it this way in a sociological sense because what it said was happening 5 years ago in your generation and my generation is that more and more we began to become defensive towards anyone that might challenge us or anyone that might address something that needs to change in our life. And instead of learning to process that or to receive that or to want to grow from that, our generation has gotten more and more defensive. No one should tell me how to live. No one should tell me what to do. No one should tell me I need to change. And we've become a very fragile and soft generation. And that's what that term was originally referring to. And yet we need to realize if we are going to take the next steps in our faith, it's important that we don't be fragile. I remember when I was in college, someone made this statement to me. They said, listen, the one who loves you the most is the one who tells you the most truth. Do you believe that? That if someone really loves you and cares about you, they're going to shoot you straight. They're going to tell you what you need to hear, even if it's not what you want to hear. But the question is do we have the security to not let our fragile egos get in the way of actually learning, of actually improving, of actually developing? Because if someone loves you enough to say, hey, I'm concerned about something in your life, I want to help you, you should see that as the greatest gift. And the greatest way they could be a friend to you, that they actually care about your life, they care about your faith, that they don't want you to destroy your life. They don't want you to destroy your faith. Okay? I think of Proverbs 27:6. It says this. It says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Now think about that. An enemy may not be the person that tears you down. Your greatest enemy may be the person that just flatters you and tells you everything is great when everyone around realizes that it's not. That's what your enemy might do. They might multiply kisses. But look at the contrast. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. See, if someone loves you enough to tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear, that's a good friend. That's someone who cares about you. That's someone who you need to stick with and you need to receive. You see, your life and your faith are too important to be fragile, okay, to be soft. If someone's caring about you and trying to help you take the next steps, okay? We've been talking about what's next. That's what this series is about. And tonight we've been thinking about this idea of how much we need others, okay? We've realized that life is, and our faith is full of dangers. But we are responsible for each other. We need one another. We need the encouragement for each other. If we're going to live out our faith, if we're going to be about the mission that God has called us on, and we need friends, we need to choose them wisely, okay? We need mentors in our life, and we need to also have the strength of character to allow people to shoot us straight and to tell us what we need to hear because they care and because they want, at the end of the day, they want our best, okay? And I want that for you all. And I want that for me. I want people like that in my life, okay? Because for the rest of my life, I want to be taking the next steps, right? I don't want to start the race well and not finish well, okay? I want to finish. I want a faith that thrives over the next 40 years if I get them, right? And I know you want that as well. So as we wrap up, here's what I want you to do. I just want you to take 2 or 3 minutes. Here's a couple of discussion questions. Just turn to a partner or two and just discuss maybe some of the things that stood out from this passage in the Bible tonight and some of the things that we've talked about. And then we'll kind of transition from there. Sound good? All right. Hey, thanks. Love being with y'all tonight. Let's take a couple of minutes, discuss this, and then we'll move on from there.